The wait is over. Spring training is officially underway, and the Braves are hard at work down in Northport, Florida. I'm Grant McCauley alongside Chris Willis, as always, as we get set to take a look at the National League East at large, a division that the Braves are looking to win for the seventh straight season, but something they're hoping will be just the first step on their road towards another World Series title. With that in mind, a team from the National League East, as we very well know, has ended Atlanta's postseason dreams the past 2 years. What has everyone done this winter that might change that outcome in 2024? Can the Braves finally clear that hurdle and beat the Phillies? And we're going to talk about that club here in just a moment. Before we get started, though, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the Battery Power channel right here on YouTube. Share the show with a friend, and all of those things, of course, help the show grow. We are on the march for 5,000 subscribers. We hope you'll be one of those, and we hope to be carving up maybe another 5,000 followers before 2024 is all said and done. Chris, we talked a lot about preseason projections not long ago, and they seem to love the Braves, no matter who you pick. The game, though, is not played on paper, as we well know, and this team has much bigger aspirations than simply winning the division again. That's just simply not enough for them.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it's almost a World Series or bust mentality. We heard them, several players talk about that at Braves Fest, and a sense of having a sense of urgency and everything. But it's different because baseball is just such a marathon this season and everything. Very, just very long. It's hard to grind that way. But I think at the end of the season, they're going to be looking, to have that edge and find that edge a little more than what we saw last year.
Yeah, that edge is something they've talked about an awful lot, and they're hoping that they're able to find that. And what's working in the regular season, some of that is going to translate and can work in the postseason, but it does go from a marathon to a sprint very quickly. So maybe that edge, maybe bringing in a guy like Chris Sale is going to help the Braves to rework their equation just a bit when it comes to October. But a lot of things have to happen between now and then before we start talking about what will take place in October. And you and I went through a lot of projections a week ago on the podcast to be named later, part of the Battery Power Podcast Network. Check that out if you want a deeper dive on these. But I'm going to stick with just the PECOTA projections from Baseball Prospectus, which seem to favor the Braves. And why not? Atlanta won 104 games in 2023. They're bringing a lot of that same team back again in 2024, running it back, as they say. PECOTA projects the Braves for 101 wins, the Dodgers at 102 wins in that same projection as of February the 12th. I say all that to say I don't think we're breaking any news here, Chris, that the Braves are the heavy favorites to repeat in the National League East for the seventh straight time, but they want to take this thing all the way to the World Series, and the projections, they like the Braves to do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a lot to like about this roster. I mean, you and I have talked about it at length when we were doing our season previews. I mean, the Braves have cornerstones at just about every position. There's very few question marks at this point. I think the rotation is kind of where we center things.
Mm-hmm.
If they can keep Chris Sale healthy, Max Fried, a healthy Max Fried season, who knows we're going to get another step forward with Spencer Strider after a miraculous season last year in his first full year in the majors. It feels like the sky's the limit for this team if they can keep everybody healthy. And I mean, as far as the division goes, I mean, it looks they are the prohibitive favorite.
Yeah, there's no question about that. And if you want to go through each of the positions for the Braves, the rotation, the bullpen, the infield, the outfield, we've done all that for you as well. You can check those out right here on the Battery Power YouTube channel. But we've got 4 other teams to discuss on this episode. And yes, I want to make you wait for the Phillies. They're clearly a threat to October goals for Atlanta, but we need to size up some other clubs before we get to that Philadelphia Phillies potential rematch come October. Let's work our way through the 2023 standings in reverse, where the Washington Nationals had themselves a very rough year a season ago. And it's hard to believe this is a club that won the World Series just 4 years ago because things went sideways pretty quickly after that. PECOTA projects a 58-104 record for Washington, a team in the midst of a rebuild, showing some signs of progress, though, I felt, in the form of a few young players. And they did win 71 games a year ago, so they dropped to 58. That would be a step backwards for this Nationals team. But C.J. Abrams looks like a building block for them. He started to find his footing in the second half last year. Lane Thomas, I feel like, is a solid piece on the mound. They've got Josiah Gray and Mackenzie Gore. They took some lumps, but I think those are arms to build around for Washington. Throw in a solid crop of prospects who are in the top 50 on most of the prospect rankings that you'll find out there, and should be joining the Nats at some point and perhaps becoming stars for them over the course of the next decade. That might sound derisive, but there's a lot that has to happen to see this team really assert itself in the division again, Chris. They're still climbing and trying to get to the top of the mountain just to be competitive again and to get back to where they felt like they were not long ago.
Yeah, this is a team that, I don't think they can reestablish themselves in this division this season. But I do like the building blocks that they're putting in place. I think that 58 win projection is really low. I think this
Mhm.
will be around 70 again. Really liked CJ Abrams, the way he looked in the second half. Interested to see, if he can carry that over and take another step forward. And then you mentioned the prospects, Dylan Cruz, James Wood, could become fixtures in that outfield as soon as this season as well. So, this is a club that might struggle out of the gates early, but again, they may look a lot different in the second half as some of those young players advance, and it could be a team that's just not doesn't just roll over for everybody.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we always talk about over the course of the season. And I know I've heard, Braves managers dating back to Bobby Cox say it is that team, they may not win the division, but they may stop somebody else from doing it by playing them really tough and really competitive over the course of the regular season. And the Nationals at 71 wins a year ago, I mean, that's nothing to write home about, but they avoided a 100-loss season. And when you're in the midst of a rebuild, that in and of itself is not a given right there. So we'll see what Washington's able to do with those building blocks and more in 2024. You might think the next stop on this trek would normally be in the NL East standings if we're going in reverse order. Well, the Miami Marlins, but you'd be wrong. After one of the most memorable rivalries in recent memory just a year prior, things between the Braves and the Mets, they were wrapped up by June this past season, and New York was on its way to a 75-win campaign. Chris, we can unpack all the reasons why, I guess, but it's safe to say that 2023 did not go according to plan for the Mets.
No, and I mean they won the offseason in a big way, spending a bunch of money to add Justin Verlander and others to the mix. And then, at the trade deadline, they're a seller. I don't think anybody had that on their big old board, coming into the season, expected them to go toe to toe with the Braves all the way to the end of the season. So,
Mm-hmm.
this roster's in a strange place. They haven't done a whole lot this offseason. There's still some good pieces here at times. They've got a new manager. Buck Showalter's gone.
Yeah.
And then the elephant in the room, of course, is Pete Alonso and his
Mm-hmm.
contract situation. And he's a Scott Boras client. I think there's a good chance he goes to free agency. But
Right.
if the Mets decide to trade him at the deadline, it could have a huge impact on what their roster looks like going forward.
Yeah, now the Mets did go make some moves this winter, but you're right, Chris. It was not the tour de force that it was after 2022 heading into last season. Buck Showalter is out. Carlos Mendoza takes over in the dugout for New York this year. The rotation won't come with the same kind of hype and ceiling of a Jacob deGrom and Max Scherzer, or Scherzer and Justin Verlander ever so briefly a year ago. They do have Kodai Senga, who's an outstanding pitcher, had a great year in 2023. He could look even better moving forward. But there was no big game hunting and headline grabbing for the Mets over the course of the winter. They failed in any attempt to land Shohei Ohtani or Yoshinobu Yamamoto, who both ended up with the Dodgers. David Stearns, though, taking over in New York, I think that's a big move in the right direction for this team. He takes the reins there. The club signed former Yankees starter Luis Severino on a one-year prove-it deal. They added Sean Manaea on a 2-year contract. We'll see if those guys can at least fortify the rotation. But, Chris, after Scherzer revealed that the Mets aren't really planning to go all in again anytime soon, then a winter of minor moves, you have to wonder what the trajectory of this club in the near term is at least. And you already brought up the Pete Alonso elephant in the room, and that's a pretty big one.
Yeah, no doubt. And you're right about David Stearns, and that does give me some hope for the Mets in the future. I think they'll, they've shown an interest to try to build their minor league system, their player development.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all good things, especially when you have the financial resources that they do, with their ownership. So, I think this is a team that could turn around pretty quick, but it doesn't feel like it still feels like they're at least a season away before they really try to make another splash.
Pacoda projection is 83 wins for the Mets. They still have some of the same names that were part of that big winner a couple of years ago, but they have to look into locking up Pete Alonso the same way that they did Francisco Lindor and Brandon Nimmo. That, I think, is their big question as to whether or not this core will stay intact moving forward. Now, the Marlins were the third-place club in the National League East, surprising a lot of folks with an 84-win season under Rookie Manager of the Year, Skip Schumacher, who was in his first season in charge for Miami, who moved on from Don Mattingly. I think there's a competitive group here, Chris, and I'm sure they want to build off their success from a year ago, but where exactly the runs are going to come from is a legitimate question mark for the Marlins, because this lineup does not give you the idea that it's going to be able to go blow for blow with some of the tougher teams in this division, let alone across baseball.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the Marlins are the most disappointing team in this division this offseason because they made the playoffs for the first time since 2003 in a full season. Of course, they made it in 2020 as well, the
Right.
shortened season. But uh, they've done nothing of significance after making the postseason. Jorge Soler is free agent still. He hit 36 home runs for them last year. I love the pickup of Jake Berger and Josh Bell. I think they'll provide some power, but at the same time, you're watching Soler walk away. The shortstop, there's not a shortstop on this roster that I can find anywhere, and I thought that was a hole that they really, really needed to make. And then, let's just drill down into their season last year. I mean, a negative 57 run differential. That was an expected win-loss of 75 and 87, 33 and 14 in one-run games. That's all stuff that's hard to duplicate. I mean, you said it earlier, projections are just projections, so you have to do it on the field, and the Marlins did that last year. But I have a hard time looking at that roster, knowing that Sandy Alcantara is not going to throw a pitch in 2024. Jorge Soler is no longer there. They haven't addressed the shortstop position, and I have to wonder, is this a club that's going to be able to overachieve again?
Yeah, and I'm not going to lay it all at the feet of Jazz Chisholm because he's going to need some help. But I mean, he's an ultra talented player who hasn't really been able to take that next step that a lot of people envision for him. Pacoda projects an 80-win season for the Marlins, so I guess it's safe to say they don't hate Miami, but they don't love them to take a step forward or even really duplicate what they did a year ago. You point out, no Sandy Alcantara does not help things for Miami. It's worth noting that Jesus Luzardo made huge strides. He could help anchor that rotation. Eri Perez is an exciting arm, just 20 years old when he debuted last year. Braxton Garrett, Edward Cabrera, these are also talented arms. So the pitching could help carry this club even with a limited offense. I just have a hard time seeing a repeat performance without them addressing the lineup at some point. And there are still a few targets out there as spring training opened across baseball.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, and that's the disappointing part, because there are a lot of intriguing pieces on this roster up and down, and just to spend a little bit of money here and there to supplement the offense. Get a shortstop that could anchor the middle of the infield. And I think this is a club that could cement itself as a playoff candidate, but unfortunately it's got to be frustrating for Marlins fans to see them break through last year and then just pretty much set out the offseason.
Yeah, we'll see what they're able to do in 2024, particularly if they don't make the kind of moves that will help them to deal with some of the losses perhaps in this lineup. And now we arrive at the Philadelphia Phillies portion of this National League East preview for us. And this is a club that has not enjoyed success that Atlanta has in the regular season, but has dealt the Braves playoff plans a death blow for 2 consecutive years. I think we learned with the expanded postseason that strange things can happen in terms of matchups, and the effects of timing are in play for the higher seeded clubs who sit out that wild card round. But let me say this: the Philadelphia Phillies' intensity is a major X factor for their success. That doesn't appear to have changed much, given that they're trotting out most of the same personnel again in 2024, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at this team, it's the swagger you see in October, and I think it all mirrors Bryce Harper in a lot of ways. And Harper's they're gonna have a full season of Harper at first base this year. I'm expecting a big season from him, and I know a lot of Braves fans, don't like Bryce Harper and enjoy booing him, but I think he feeds off that type of thing.
Yeah,
and I think that's what the way this Phillies roster has kind of been the last 2 years. They fed off that crowd in Philadelphia. They fed off the boos in Atlanta. And, they're built for a short series, and they've shown that, especially at the top of the rotation with Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler.
And they've shown they'll spend some money as well. They signed Zach Wheeler a few years ago. Clearly, Harper was a big-time deal for them. Trey Turner a season ago. Pacoda has the Phillies winning 84 games in the projections. They won 90 a year ago en route to another NLCS appearance of the Braves with 104 wins. He kept them at an arm's distance throughout the course of the regular season. Biggest move of the winter for the Philadelphia Phillies was keeping Aaron Nola from going anywhere else, perhaps even bolting for Atlanta. They secured Nola to a long-term deal. The rest of the winter was remarkably quiet for the Phillies. They added a little bit to the bullpen, but they didn't have that huge acquisition like a Trey Turner, for example. But I'm a little surprised that they didn't do a little bit more after coming up just one game short of another trip to the World Series, Chris.
I'm a little surprised too. I know they were after Yamamoto too, and they were in on him as well. And I think that could have changed the trajectory of their offseason significantly. But they've got a question mark too, because Zach Wheeler will be a free agent at the end of the season. Are they going to give him the same type of contract they gave Aaron Nolan? I mean, this is an older roster, but it's battle tested too. And I think the projections are a little low on the Phillies if they can keep all the important pieces healthy. I think this is probably around a 90 win club. If everything goes their way.
Yeah, and certainly let's close out with some NL East predictions based off of that. I don't expect this to be a very difficult exercise, so I'm going to go first and see if anything differs I've got the Braves, the Phillies, then the Mets, then the Marlins, though that could be really a toss-up, and the Nationals at the bottom. That's how I see the division playing out. I expect the Braves and the Phillies to reach October again. That's no big surprise. I'm just kind of hoping that Atlanta can figure out a way to make the ending of what could be a trilogy and a matchup of the Phillies a little bit more satisfying than, say, a Disney Star Wars kind of trilogy. Chris, what do you got for the National League East?
Yeah, I'd go with Braves, Phillies, Mets, Marlins, and Nationals, and my hot take, I guess, will be that I don't think the gap between the Nationals and the Marlins is going to be as wide as a lot of people think.
I'm really interested to see how that all plays out because you mentioned there's a lot of young talent in Washington. And while it's not as much fun to go through a rebuild, one of the more exciting things, and Braves fans know this because, hey, it wasn't that long ago when you start to see the pieces of what could be your future and your success debut and have some success at the big league level, things can get exciting pretty quick. Does that mean the Nationals are going to climb up the standings? Well, of course not. But the Marlins showed it a year ago. There can be some different X factors like being great in one-run games that can help you out quite a bit. There can be regression in the form of the New York Mets falling from a 101 win season to just 75 a year later. And of course, the Phillies have proven we just need to get to October, punch our ticket, and we like our chances once we get there. And the Braves, who won the World Series, won it all in 2021, have a team that feels like it should have done much more the last couple of years. They come into 2024 with unfinished business, most certainly. That'll do it for this episode of BPTV. Next time we catch up, we'll have exhibition baseball to talk about, spring training storylines to discuss. I'll be bringing you continuous coverage for 92.9 The Game in Atlanta right here on Battery Power, and you can check out everything I've got going on all the different platforms at FromTheDiamond.com. As always, hit the subscribe button right here on the Battery Power YouTube channel. Turn on those notifications. You'll get an alert every time we drop a new episode. Thanks, as always, for riding along with us. We look forward to catching you again next time, and until then, so long, Braves Country.